He thought he'd buried everything about Leo. Then one day, Leo's eyes were at his door. How could a stranger hold the key to the darkest rooms of your heart? A knock, a young girl, and then his ordered world began to crumble. He'd learned to live with his son's ghost. He was never prepared to face his flesh and blood. 5 years sealed away, an uninvited guest, and a secret about to break free. Arthur didn't seek out the past. The past sought him, taking the form of a young girl with familiar eyes and an undeniable request. 5 years. 5 years the silence had festered, coiled around a single, unheard message on a burner phone I should have thrown away long ago. Leo's last words, or so I presumed them to be, locked away in the bottom drawer of my mahogany desk, a Pandora's box of potential truths I hadn't the courage, or perhaps, in some dark recess of my stubborn heart, the will to open. He'd vanished, my son, not merely drifted away in the slow tide of family estrangements, but erased himself from the known world, leaving behind only this phantom communication and a chasm of unanswerable questions. Every Tuesday, like clockwork, I try to bury the thought of it deeper under the weight of routine, under the meticulous cataloging of long-dead poets who knew far more about grief than I was ever willing to admit, even to myself. Until she knocked. The sound was an insult. 3 sharp raps, impatient, on the thin wood of my apartment door, slicing through the precise, cultivated silence I'd spent half a decade perfecting. Tuesdays were for order, for the careful alignment of thoughts, not for this. This intrusion, whatever it was, had no place in the mausoleum of my meticulously managed solitude. I considered, for a moment, not answering, letting the interruption fade back into the city's irrelevant hum. But the knocking came again, more insistent this time, a summons I couldn't quite ignore. With a sigh that felt older than my 72 years, a sound freighted with the weariness of too many unspoken things, I pushed back from my desk, the scent of lemon oil and fading paper clinging to my cardigan like a second skin. Through the peephole, a girl. Teenager, slight build, a shock of dark hair falling over one eye, clutching a worn backpack like a shield. Unfamiliar, therefore unwelcome. The world had a habit of sending its stray, unwanted items to my doorstep. I opened the door a crack, the chain still on, a meager defense against the inevitable. Yes, my voice was rust, rough from disuse, certainly, and used to surprise. Her eyes, when she finally met mine, were a startling, unsettling blue. Leo's eyes. The thought ambushed me, a hidden tripwire in the carefully swept pathways of my mind. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, a sensation I'd learned to expertly ignore. "Arthur Finch?" she asked. Her voice was low, steady, but with an undercurrent I couldn't quite place. Not defiance, not yet. Something closer to resolve. That depends on who's asking. A foolish, ponderous thing to say. Habit, I suppose. The habit of deflection. "I'm Lily," she said, pushing a stray strand of that dark hair back. Lily Finch, Leo's daughter. Leo. The name resonated in the small, sterile space of my hallway, a word I hadn't allowed myself to form, not allowed for 5 years. Not since the last jagged message, the one still sitting on that damnable burner phone in the back of my desk drawer, its silence a louder accusation than any words it might contain. I felt my face tighten, the carefully constructed mask of polite indifference threatening to crack. I see. 2 words. Entire volumes of avoidance packed into them. Lily shifted her backpack. "I need to talk to you. About my father." Her gaze didn't waver. That stubborn set to her jaw. That was Leo, too. Or perhaps it was the ghost of the boy he used to be, before the world, before I had carved different lines into him. There's nothing to say about Leo that hasn't already been left unsaid for too long. My own words sounded hollow, even to me. An old recording played one too many times. "He left a voicemail," she stated, not asked. "The day before before." Her voice caught, just a fraction. On a phone like this. She fumbled in her backpack and produced a cheap, black burner phone, identical to the one in my drawer. My stomach twisted. "I know you have one. He told my mom he was calling you." I need to hear it, Mr. Finch. Grandpa. The grandpa was a tactical insertion, I suspected. A soft probe for a weak point in the armor. It found one. The silence stretched, thick with the dust of years, with unspoken griefs, with the thing in my drawer I'd rather burn the building down than listen to. That's not possible, I said, my voice flat. That foe is gone. Disposed of. A lie. Another brick in the wall. Her eyes, Leo's eyes, narrowed slightly. My mom said you were difficult. A small, humorless smile touched her lips. She also said you never threw anything away if you thought it might hold a sliver of a story, however painful. She knew me then, or knew the version of me her mother had curated for her. The archivist. The man who lived more in the brittle pages of the past than in the messy, inconvenient present. Look, I started, intending to shut the door, to retreat back into my ordered quiet. But she was already a step ahead, her thin frame somehow more solid than it appeared. I came a long way. By bus. From North Carolina. Her chin lifted. I'm not leaving until I hear that message. It's the only piece of him I have left. The only thing that might tell me anything. The raw grief in that last word, the undisguised need, it bypassed the chain on the door, bypassed all my careful barricades. It was a different kind of insult, this one to the fortress I'd built around my heart. An insult I couldn't ignore. The chain rattled as I reluctantly slid it free. One night, I said, the words tasting like ash. You can stay one night. But we're not discussing that device. I stepped back, allowing her entry into the silent, catalogued mausoleum of my life. She hesitated for only a second before stepping over the threshold, bringing with her the scent of rain and a future I had no intention of facing. The air in my apartment, usually still and predictable, suddenly felt charged, the unwanted key to a locked room now inexplicably in her hand. The girl, Lily, was a disruption given human form. She occupied the small guest room, a space usually reserved for overflow books and the quiet accumulation of dust, transforming it with her mere presence. A discarded sock on the floor felt like an act of rebellion against my established order. The faint scent of a too-sweet shampoo, alien in my sterile environment, clung to the air. I found myself cataloging her infractions as if they were errata in a badly printed manuscript. Mornings were the worst. My precise ritual of tea, toast, and the obituaries was now punctuated by the soft sounds of her stirring, the creak of the guest room door. She'd emerge, sleep-flushed and solemn, offering a tentative good morning that felt like a pebble dropped into a deep, still well. I'd grunt in reply, retreating behind the broadsheet of the Times. Her explorations of the apartment were quiet, almost furtive, yet they grated. I'd hear her pause in the hallway outside my study, her shadow falling briefly across the frosted glass. She wasn't prying, not overtly. It was more like a lost animal sniffing for a familiar scent, a way back to something. The object of her search, I knew, was the memory of her father, and by extension, the damn phone. One afternoon, I found her standing before the mantelpiece, her fingers hovering inches from a small, dust-caked model of a Spitfire. Leo had built it painstakingly when he was 10. His small hands, usually so restless, had been surprisingly deft with the fragile balsa wood and glue. I remembered the fierce concentration in his eyes, the way his tongue poked out from the corner of his mouth. A good memory, one of the few I allowed myself to unearth without wincing. Dad made this, didn't he? Lily's voice was soft, barely a whisper. He did. The words were tight in my throat. She traced the line of a wing, not quite touching. He always loved planes. Said they were the only things that truly understood freedom. An echo. I recalled Leo, older, perhaps 16, using those exact words, flinging them at me like a challenge during one of our increasingly bitter arguments. He'd wanted to study aeronautical engineering. I'd insisted on law, something practical, something safe, something that wouldn't take him so far away. My practicality had been a hammer, I saw now, smashing his fragile aspirations. Lily turned, those unsettling blue eyes fixed on mine. Was he happy here, Grandpa? Before what? Before he left? Before I drove him away? The unspoken questions hung heavy. He was a boy, I said, evading. Boys have their seasons. Later, she was near my study again. I'd left the door ajar, a foolish oversight. I saw her reflection in the polished surface of my desk, her gaze fixed on the second drawer down, the one that didn't lock, but might as well have been welded shut for all the times I'd accessed its contents. My irritation, a low, familiar hum, spiked. I cleared my throat, a sound like gravel. She flinched, turning quickly. Sorry, I was just looking for something you won't find. I finished, my tone sharper than intended. The old defenses quick to rise. Her face, which had held a hopeful, almost wistful expression, shuddered. The light in Leo's eyes dimmed. She nodded once, a small, defeated gesture, and retreated to the guest room. That night, sleep was a battlefield. Tossing, turning, fragments of Leo assailing me. His childhood laughter, his sullen teenage silences, the bewildered hurt in his eyes after our last terrible fight. And then his voice, sharp with an anger that had felt like a betrayal at the time. You don't listen. You never listen. Driven by an impulse I didn't understand, I rose, the floorboards cold beneath my bare feet. In the study, moonlight striped the room. The burner phone lay in the drawer like a dormant viper. I picked it up. Its plastic casing was smooth, anonymous. I could feel the slight weight of the battery, the faint energy of its unspoken message. My thumb hovered over the play button. 5 years of silence, 5 years of corrosive wondering, 5 years of self-imposed ignorance that was both a shield and a torment. What if he was asking for help? What if it was an apology? What if it was proof that I had, in the end, failed him utterly? The memory I'd replayed earlier, his words about the Spitfire, the only things that truly understood freedom, returned with a new, chilling resonance. He had been telling me, even then, of his desperate need to escape, not just the gravitational pull of Earth, but me. My hand trembled. I couldn't do it. Not yet. With a sound that was almost a sob, I shoved the phone back into the drawer, burying it beneath a pile of old tax returns. Some dust, I realized, was best left undisturbed, some echoes best left to fade. But I knew, with a certainty that settled like ice in my gut, that Lily wouldn't let them. She was here to stir the dust, to amplify the echoes, until they became too loud to ignore. Lily's patience, I was discovering, had the tensile strength of spun steel. Each morning, after her polite, expectant greeting, a silence would settle between us, thick with the unspoken. It was a waiting game, and she was proving far more adept at it than I. My carefully curated solitude had become a shared cell, the bars forged from her quiet determination and my own obstinate fear. One rainy afternoon, 3 days into her occupation of my guest room, she found me staring out the living room window at the relentless gray curtain obscuring the city. She didn't ask about the phone. Instead, she said, her voice barely above the drumming of rain on the glass, Dad used to love rainy days. He said they were good for thinking. He'd make up stories, wild ones, about where the raindrops came from. I flinched internally. Leo, the storyteller. Leo, who dreamed of worlds beyond the sensible, predictable one I had tried to build for him. A sharp pang of guilt, familiar and unwelcome, twisted in my chest. How many of his stories had I dismissed with a curt nod? My mind already on lesson plans or unpaid bills. He sounds imaginative. I managed, the word feeling inadequate, like offering a thimble of water to a man dying of thirst. He was. Lily turned from the window, her gaze direct. He also used to say that sometimes the quietest people had the loudest storms inside them. A clear barb, expertly delivered. Was she talking about Leo or me? Or both? That was the unsettling thing about her. She saw too much, said just enough to leave me questioning. The next day, desperate for a change of scenery, a reprieve from the charged atmosphere of the apartment, I suggested a walk. To my surprise, she agreed. We ended up at Coburn Park, a small, slightly shabby square of green a few blocks away. I used to bring Leo here occasionally when he was small, to push him on the rusty swings, an activity I'd performed with a dutiful, rather than joyful sense of parental obligation. Now, sitting on a damp park bench, the place felt saturated with a different kind of melancholy. Lily sat beside me, not speaking for a long time, just watching a bedraggled pigeon pecking at a discarded crust. The silence was different here, less accusatory than in the apartment, more shared acknowledgement of something heavy and unspoken. "Did he ever talk about me?" she asked finally, her voice small. "Before, when I was little." I searched my memory. Leo hadn't spoken of her much in those last few years of strained contact. Or perhaps I hadn't listened properly. "He was proud of you, Lily," I said, latching onto a safe generality. "Always said you were smart." Another inadequate thimbleful. She picked at a loose thread on her jeans. "Smart wasn't what I asked, Grandpa." The gentle rebuke hung in the air. Did he miss me? The raw vulnerability in her question was a direct hit. I saw again the image of Leo, aged 16, his face pale with fury after I'd told him his art was a hobby, not a future. He'd shouted, then, something about me not understanding anything, about me being hollow. Had that hollowness extended to how I perceived his love for his own child? I started, then stopped. The truth was, I didn't know how Leo had felt about missing Lily, not deeply. Our conversations had been minefields of resentment and misfired words. How could I offer her comfort when I had none myself? How could I speak of his love for her when I felt so profoundly unloved by him? I wanted to tell her something, anything, to ease the sadness in her young eyes. But the words wouldn't form. The weight of my own failures, my own silences with Leo, pressed down on me. She must have seen the struggle on my face. She looked away, towards the rustling leaves of an old oak. "It's okay," she said, though her voice belied it. "I guess some things, you just carry them." We sat there for another hour, the silence returning, but now laced with a new layer of shared, if unarticulated, sorrow. As we walked back, I noticed she wasn't trying to match my brisk, evasive pace anymore. She walked a little slower, and I, without consciously deciding to, found myself slowing too. That evening, I didn't retreat to my study immediately after our frugal dinner of soup and bread. I lingered in the kitchen, ostensibly washing dishes, while Lily sat at the small formica table, sketching in a notebook. The apartment felt different. The waiting was still there, a palpable entity, but it was no longer solely mine. It had become a shared burden. Later, alone in the dim light of my desk lamp, I pulled out the burner phone again. Her words echoed. "Smart wasn't what I asked. Did he miss me?" And for the first time, I didn't just feel fear of what the voicemail might contain about me. I felt a sliver of Leo's possible pain, his possible longing for the daughter he'd left behind. The phone felt heavier in my hand. The silence it held more complex. This, I sensed, was a shift in perspective, a painful, reluctant opening to an empathy I had long suppressed. I still didn't press play, but I didn't shove it back into the drawer with the same revulsion. I left it on the corner of my desk, a small, dark challenge in the encroaching night. The uneasy truce settled between Lily and me was as thin as old ice. We navigated the confines of my apartment like two wary celestial bodies, drawn by an unseen gravity but careful to maintain our orbits, lest we collide and shatter. Her desperation simmered beneath a veneer of forced patience. My own defenses, though breached, were still attempting repairs. One morning, while I was ostensibly engrossed in a biography of Disraeli, a suitably dry and emotionless subject, Lily emerged from the guest room holding a small, framed photograph I hadn't seen in years. It was Leo, perhaps 7, gap-toothed and grinning, holding an impossibly large trout. I was beside him, younger, leaner, a faint, awkward smile on my face. A moment of captured, uncomplicated joy. Or so it had seemed at the time. "This was you and Dad, wasn't it?" Lily's voice was carefully neutral, but her eyes, fixed on the image, held a universe of longing. "Yes, up at Miller's Creek. He was surprisingly good at fishing." The memory, normally one I kept locked away with other relics of a less complicated past, now felt different. Tainted. Knowing what came after, knowing the silences and the anger that would eventually consume us. Even this innocent image felt like a lie. The past was no longer static. It was being actively, painfully reframed by the present. "He looks happy," she said, a statement more than a question. "You both do." She paused. "What happened, Grandpa?" The question, simple, direct, landed like a blow. I had no answer that wouldn't sound like an excuse, a self-serving edit of a deeply flawed history. I mumbled something about people changing, about life taking its turns. My usual evasions. But this time, the words felt like sand in my mouth. My usual sharpness, that academic precision I'd always used to keep the world at bay, was blunted. She didn't press, just returned the photograph to the dusty shelf it had occupied, her silence a more potent accusation than any words. That night, sleep was a stranger. I found myself pacing the small living room, the city's nocturnal hum a poor substitute for peace. The door to the guest room was slightly ajar. I saw Lily, curled on the narrow bed that had once been Leo's when he'd visited as a boy. She was asleep, her breathing soft, vulnerable. One hand was thrown out, clutching a small, creased photograph. Leo, I presumed. Her face, in the dim light filtering from the hallway, was so young, etched with a sorrow that felt too large for her years. An impulse, foreign and unsettling, moved me. I retrieved the old, frayed Afghan from the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. My wife, Marion, had knitted it decades ago. It was soft with age and memory. It was a charged object in itself, imbued with her scent, her love, everything I had walled myself off from. I unfolded it carefully and draped it over Lily. Her breathing hitched slightly, then settled. For a long moment, I stood there, looking down at her. She wasn't just Leo's daughter, the unwelcome inquisitor. She was a child, a grieving child. This quiet act, this unexpected stirring of care, felt like a seismic shift within the frozen landscape of my heart. It was, I suppose, the true midpoint of my current painful re-education. The next afternoon, as if sensing that shift, Lily approached me with a newfound, almost desperate calm. We were in the kitchen, the silence punctuated by the drip of a faulty faucet I'd been meaning to fix for months. "Grandpa," she began, her voice low but clear, "I've been thinking. I don't want you to think I expect you to fix anything about Dad, or to make it all make sense. She took a breath, her gaze unwavering. "I just need to understand. Whatever is on that phone, whatever it says, I need to hear it, even if it hurts. Please." Her plea was stripped bare of accusation, of childish demand. It was the request of one human being to another, asking for a shard of truth in a world of painful absences. I looked at her, truly looked, and saw not just Leo's eyes, but the resilient strength of a young woman carrying an unbearable weight. My meticulously constructed facade, already riddled with cracks, began to properly crumble. Lily's words from the previous afternoon, "I just need to understand, even if it hurts, please," had lodged themselves in my mind like stubborn shrapnel. There was no more room for evasion, no dusty corner left in which to hide the truth or my fear of it. The weight of her quiet plea, heavier than all my years of practiced denial, finally tipped the scale. That evening, after a dinner eaten in a silence, so thick it felt like another presence in the room, I spoke. "All right, Lily." My voice was a dry rasp, a stranger to my own ears. "The phone." "Well, listen." She didn't gasp, didn't show any outward sign of triumph. Just a slow nod, her blue eyes, so like Leo's, wide and shadowed with a trepidation that mirrored my own. This was not a victory for her, I realized, but the bracing for an inevitable pain. The threshold moment unfolded with agonizing slowness. I retrieved the burner phone from the corner of my desk where it had sat, a dark accusation, since the night before last. The plastic felt cold, alien in my hand, as if it had absorbed all the frigid silence of the years it had lain dormant. My fingers, usually so steady when handling brittle manuscripts or tracing the faint script of forgotten letters, trembled as I navigated its crude menu. Lily sat opposite me at the small Formica kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. The only sounds were the hum of the ancient refrigerator and the frantic thumping of my own heart, a trapped bird against my ribs. I found the single save message. My thumb hovered over the play icon. This was it. The precipice. 5 years of what-ifs, of self-justifications, of carefully constructed ignorance, all about to be annihilated by a small electronic pulse. I glanced at Lily. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She gave another small, almost imperceptible nod. I pressed play. A crackle of static, then Leo's voice. Not the belligerent shout of our last argument, nor the easy laughter of his childhood. This was a voice scraped raw, stretched taut over a frame of unbearable pain. Dad, a hesitant start, as if even speaking my name was an effort. I don't even know why I'm calling. You won't listen. You never do. A bitter laugh, short and sharp. Remember when I wanted to go to art school? Remember what you said? A lovely hobby, Leo, but you need a real profession. Something to make a man of you. A man like you meant. My breath hitched. I remembered. Oh, I remembered. The sunlit afternoon in my study, Leo, 17, his portfolio clutched in his hands, his eyes alight with a desperate, fragile hope. My dismissive words, cloaked in a father's supposed wisdom, a father's supposed care. Practicality. Security. I had used them like bludgeons. Leo's voice continued, lower now, thick with an unshed grief that resonated across the years, across the silence. You didn't just dismiss my dream, Dad. You dismissed me. The part of me that was trying to breathe. That day, something inside me just broke. You called it a phase, a childish fancy. What was my air, Dad? And you took it. You didn't see me. You saw who you wanted me to be, or who you were afraid I wouldn't be. The air in my small kitchen grew thin, unbreathable. I could see Lily out of the corner of my eye, her head bowed, a tear tracing a slow, glistening path down her cheek. I tried, Leo's voice went on, weary now, almost a whisper. To be what you wanted. The sensible job, the life that fit the frame you built. But it was like wearing someone else's skin, too tight, suffocating. I had to get out, Dad. I had to disappear from your world, from your judgment, just to try and find out if there was anything left of myself to salvage. I had to go. I couldn't breathe around you anymore. The message ended there, not with a click, but with a fading exhalation, as if the effort of speaking had finally depleted him entirely. Then, only static. The silence that descended was absolute, heavier than any I had ever known. It was the silence of a truth finally unearthed, brutal and unsparing. My carefully constructed image of Leo, the angry, impetuous son who had abandoned his responsibilities, who had inflicted such pain, shattered, and in its place was the unbearable image of a young man gasping for air, driven away by my own blind, suffocating pride. My complicity, the challenge I had run from for so long, was now laid bare, irrefutable. It was a devastation that hollowed me out from the inside, leaving nothing but a raw, gaping ache. Lily didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply sat there, shoulders shaking, the sound of her quiet sobs filling the void Leo's voice had left. I looked at her, at the fresh wave of her father's pain, now crashing over her, a pain I had authored, and a different kind of breaking began within me. The neat lines of accuser and accused blurred into a single landscape of sorrow. Hours, or perhaps a lifetime, seemed to pass in the kitchen's oppressive silence. The ghost of Leo's voice, with its burden of pain and accusation, had settled into the very marrow of the room, into the formica tabletop, into the chipped pattern of the linoleum floor. Lily's quiet sobs had eventually subsided, leaving behind an exhausted stillness. The burner phone lay on the table between us, a dead thing now, its terrible sermon delivered. I don't know how long we sat there, two figures etched in the dim light, marooned on an island of shared devastation. Finally, Lily lifted her head. Her face was blotched, her eyes swollen, but the gaze she fixed on me was clear, startlingly adult. The art school, she whispered, her voice hoarse. The one he wanted to go to after high school. I nodded, a small, jerking movement. My throat felt like sandpaper. Yes, near Philadelphia. He'd received a preliminary acceptance, conditional on his final portfolio. This was me, volunteering a piece of the unadorned truth, a thing I would have swallowed fire to avoid just days before. And you told him it wasn't a real future? I told him, I said, the words heavy as stones, that he needed a profession that would feed him, not one that would feed on him. I told him artists starved. I told him he was throwing his intellect away on frivolous pursuits. Each word was an admission, a fresh incision. I believed I was being practical, sensible, a father guiding his son. The bitter irony of it now coated my tongue. Lily didn't respond for a long moment, just traced the rim of an invisible cup on the table. Then, almost too softly to hear, he still drew. All the time. Hidden sketches in the margins of notebooks on napkins. Mom said he never showed anyone. The image of Leo secretly nurturing that small, wounded flame of creativity, even after I tried so thoroughly to extinguish it, was another kind of torment. Slowly, tentatively, as if crossing a minefield, Lily reached out and laid her small, cool hand over mine where it rested, clenched on the tabletop. I flinched, surprised by the contact, by its unexpected gentleness. For 5 years, my primary physical contact had been the sterile grip of a grocery cart or the impersonal brush of strangers on the street. Her touch, light as it was, felt like an anchor. I didn't pull away. She eventually retreated to the guest room, leaving me alone with the echoes and the dawning of a grim, unsparing self-awareness. The new equilibrium was beginning, but it was a landscape shaped by profound loss and regret. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the apartment steeped in an unfamiliar quiet. Not the quiet of my ordered solitude, but the quiet of exhaustion, of emotion spent. Lily was asleep on the couch again, the frayed Afghan pulled up to her chin. I went to the kitchen and, from a habit so old it felt ingrained in my bones, reached for 2 mugs. I paused. 2. For years, it had only been 1. With a strange, hollow feeling in my chest, I filled the kettle. This deviation from my solitary routine felt monumental. As the coffee brewed, its aroma a small, domestic comfort in the vastness of my desolation. I found Lily awake, sitting on the edge of the couch, watching me. I think I'll stay a few more days, she said, her voice still fragile. If that's all right. Yes, I said. More than all right. A terrifying prospect, but also, inexplicably, a pinprick of something I hadn't felt in years. Not hope, not yet. Just less alone. I handed her a mug. She took it, her fingers brushing mine. We stood by the window, looking out at the awakening city. A soft, persistent rain had begun to fall. It wasn't a storm, not a deluge. Just a gentle washing, blurring the sharp edges of the buildings, anointing the gray streets with a quiet sheen. It felt like tears, perhaps, but also like a cleansing. Do you think, Lily began, then hesitated. Do you think Dad's okay? Wherever he is. The question I had asked myself 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways, always without an answer. I looked at the rain, at the world washed clean and new yet still holding all its old sorrows. I don't know, Lily, I said, and it was the most honest thing I'd said in decades. I truly don't know. I turned to her, this child of my lost child, this unexpected harbinger of a terrible truth and a terrifying, fragile new beginning. But I hope so. With all my heart. I hope he found his air, his freedom. She nodded, a single tear escaping to mingle with the steam from her mug. And in that shared, uncertain hope, in the quiet fall of the first rain after a long drought, something in the ruined landscape of my heart began, ever so tentatively, to shift. We didn't have answers. We didn't have Leo. But for the first time in a very long time, we had each other, bound not by blood alone, but by a shared, painful truth and the nascent possibility of a path forward, however shadowed it might be.